There are three units of measurement associated with typography: the point, the pica, the M, and the N. In typography, measurements are either absolute or relative. Absolute measurements are measurements of fixed values. For example, an inch is always an inch, and there are 12 inches in a foot. In the same way, points and picas have fixed values that have conversions with other units of measurement. All absolute measurements are expressed in finite terms that cannot be altered. Relative measurements, on the other hand, are linked to the size of the type itself. They are not as fixed. They don't have an absolute size. So basically, in Filipino, depende. M's and N's are examples of relative measurements, and they are relative to the size of the type being set. In other words, depende sa size ng type mismo. The use of points dates back to metal letterpress type. In the days of letterpress, when you talk about a font's point size, you're not measuring the height of the letter itself, but the block of lead that the letter sits on, otherwise called the body. Nowadays, we normally see letters on the computer screen, and the body around the letter is invisible. The more accurate way of defining point size is to say that it is the horizontal distance from one baseline to the other. Here is a typeface set in 72 points. Points have a direct relationship to inches. Here I've drawn a square 1 by 1 inch in size. There are 72 points in an inch, and there are also 6 picas in 1 inch. So, 12 points is equal to 1 pica. Points are abbreviated to PT, while picas to P. The notation for picas and 3 points is 6P3. One thing to remember about points though, they look different for each typeface. Here is an example of two typefaces, both set in 72 points. Note their difference in size. Here's another one. In the days of metal type, letters couldn't be scaled dynamically, so they were sold in standard point sizes that were chosen for their pleasing relationship to each other. In today's programs, you can still see the standard point sizes incorporated in the application's default choices. Although nowadays you can use any point size, it's important to be familiar with these standard point sizes and their functions in relation to a typographical layout. For example, body copy or body text is usually set at 9 to 12 points. For reference, type in a paperback novel is usually set in around 9 points. This copy block was also set in 9 points. Type above 14 points is called display type. Some display types are so decorative that they don't really work for text setting and are available in capitals only. For reference, the headline of this article is set at 30 points, while the subheadline is at 16 points. Captions or less important information, on the other hand, can be set at 6 to 8 points. This caption block was set at 7 points. Besides points and picas, typographers use other units of measurement to describe horizontal spaces. This is the M. An M is a horizontal measurement as wide as the typeface is tall. So for example, for these two letters set at 72 points, an M space is 72 points wide. An N space, on the other hand, is half the size of an M. So with all these units of measurement, which should you use? Nowadays, unless a project has a specific requirement, it's a matter of personal preference. All the common design applications support both points and picas and various other units, and it's easy to convert from one unit to the other. Although it's not essential that you have complete mastery over these type measurements, it's important to have a sense of how large or how small these measurements are once they're printed in real life. Because often, what appears on the screen isn't how it'll appear once it's printed. So if you're not familiar with these measurements, you may misjudge how large or how small you've set your type. Leading is the space between lines of type. The term comes from the pieces of lead inserted between actual lines of metal type. Leading is specified in points. Normal leading is the type size plus 20%. Normal leading is when long body text is most readable. Type size and leading are usually shown as a fraction. Type size first, leading next. This particular notation is read as 12 on 14.4. Note that 14.4 is plus 20% of the 12-point type size. This is also the reason why when you open either Adobe Illustrator or InDesign, the auto leading value is set at 12 while leading is 14.4. You can tell it's on auto because of the parentheses on the value. Working with auto-leading isn't always advisable because of the obscure decimal number that is sometimes produced at the end of the number. Personally, I remove the auto function, and as a rule of thumb, I add +2 points to the body text size for a cleaner rounded value. So for example, for 10 points, I sometimes use 12 points leading for normal body text. Kerning is adjusting the space between pairs of certain letters to improve their visual appearance. Now, why would you want to do this? Well, the unit allocation designed by typographers in their typefaces is usually optimized for long body text. So when you enlarge the text to display size, the spacing between the letters becomes a bit too large and needs to be adjusted. For example, in this word typeset at 200 points, the letter L and T seems a bit too far apart compared to the rest of the letters. You can try squinting your eyes and focus on the negative space between the letters to gauge the spaces. You can use kerning to bring the T a little closer to the L for a tighter appearance. Tracking, on the other hand, adjusts the spacing between all the letters of the text as opposed to just pairs of letters. Alignment. Choosing to align the text carries with it certain aesthetic and cultural qualities and associations. Centered text is symmetrical and often appears in invitations, title pages, certificates, and tombstones. It seems the easiest and most intuitive way of aligning text, but you have to take care in breaking the lines of the text. Centered lines should be broken to emphasize a key phrase or detail such as the name of the event or the date. Allow a new thought or important detail to begin on its own line, or else it can be difficult to read. You should also consider the overall shape of the text and not make random line breaks such as this. So in other words, basahin nyo yung text. Find out which makes more sense and apply aesthetics into the composition or the alignment of the text. Justified text features even edges on both left and right sides of the column. This has been the norm since the invention of printing with movable type. In the old days, printers justified each line by hand using small metal spacers. Now the computer does this automatically. But using this indiscriminately and without care can result in things like this. See those white gaps in the copy block? They're called rivers. They look ugly and unprofessional and should be avoided like the plague. If you can't remove those for whatever reason, you're better off with flush left, ragged right. In this alignment, the left edge is hard and the right edge soft. This soft and even edge is called a rag. In this alignment, word spaces do not fluctuate, so you don't get the big white holes in the text. Using this alignment has its advantages and respects the normal reading flow of our culture, which is left to right. With the hard left edge, your eyes have a consistent reference point in reading. But care should be taken in controlling the rag. A good rag looks pleasantly uneven with no lines that are excessively short or long, and with hyphenation kept to a minimum. Controlling the rag is an aesthetic choice and you have to develop an eye for it. Flush right, rag left. I have to tell you, I have seen a lot of fine art students use flush right for long body text. And to be honest, if you're a reader, this alignment is difficult to read. That's why you really have to develop an appreciation for reading, especially when you're layouting copy. The common wisdom is, since we usually start reading from left to right, the uneven rag makes it difficult for our eyes to find a common reference point, and I have to agree with that. So I suggest using this alignment only for short lines of text, but not really recommended for long body copy. Things to look out for. Avoid orphans and widows. Orphan is a word or a few words left alone in its own line of the paragraph, thus creating too much white space between paragraphs. Widow is a line of text at the end of a paragraph, and suddenly it becomes separated from the rest of the text, meaning that this line is either in the next column or somehow got into the next page. So avoid that. When composing long blocks of copy, stick to optimum line lengths, which is around 50 to 60 characters, including spaces. Some even say up to 75. Why? If a line of text is too long, the reader's eyes will have a hard time focusing on the text. This is because the line length makes it difficult to gauge where the line starts and when the line ends. Furthermore, it can be difficult to continue on to the correct line in large blocks of text. If a line is too narrow, the eye will have to travel back and forth too often, breaking the reader's rhythm. Too short lines also tend to stress readers, making them begin on the next line before finishing the current one, hence skipping potentially important words. The exception are newspapers. Now, how do I find out for sure? Under the info dialog box in either Illustrator or InDesign, selecting the line will allow you to check the exact number of characters.